Hi and welcome back to Darvanalee Designs Studio. For those that don't know, my name's Nicole Reid and today we are here for the A to Z Quilt Block Challenge for 2023. We are up to Block Q. Today we are making the Queen's Court, so let's get started. Okay, so as I said in the intro, we're here to make the Queen's Court block, and this is what it looks like when it's finished. You're going to need your cutting instructions, and that is linked up down below, and you can print that off. And then you're going to need 2 fabrics. That's all you're going to need today. This is a great scrap busting block because we can use some of our smaller pieces of fabric for our crowns and also for the center part of the block. You're also going to need something to mark your white squares because we're making some half square triangles today. You're going to need some thread snips. A purple thing is always a good thing to have. You're going to need a couple of rulers. You're going to need a rotary cutter, and obviously you're going to need some pins. My favorite pins are fork pins, and the link is for that down below. You're also going to need an iron and a working sewing machine with matching thread, and today we will be pressing our seams open, so you might want to have a little clapper there to help you set those seams. I don't necessarily use it, but sometimes if I've got a bit of a stubborn seam that just won't sit flat for me, I'll use the clapper then. Alright, so once you've got all of your supplies together and your fabrics all cut, we're going to start making our block. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to make some half square triangles. So just move your rectangle and your other squares out of the way and grab your 2 3/4 squares in the colour and also in the white, and we're going to mark the back of our fabric with a ruler and a pencil, and we're going to go corner to corner. We've done this before in previous videos, and then we'll place them right sides together, and we're going to continue doing that for all 8. So you can see here that we've now got them all marked, all 8 are done, and we're ready to head to the sewing machine. Once we're at the sewing machine, you can see here that I have it under the presser foot, and I'm stitching 1/4 inch away from that line that we marked, and we're going to chain piece all of our 8 pieces through, and then we're going to, once we get to our last one, we will turn that around and we will do exactly the same thing but on the other side of the line, and when we come back we will be cutting these apart. Now we've sewn those together, we're going to actually clip these apart. Once they're clipped apart, we'll grab our iron and we're going to give them a press, and what that does is just set the seam, because sometimes, especially on my machine here, sometimes it can get a little bit the fabric will look a little bit wavy, so just giving it a press and getting that seam to relax before we cut them apart will help us achieve a much nicer block. So you can see here I'm just grabbing the iron and not doing anything special at all, just basically taking one of the squares and giving it a press and making sure that it's sitting nice and flat, and that will set the seam, and next we're going to cut them open. So now what we're doing is we're taking one of our squares and we're getting our ruler and our rotary cutter, and we're placing the ruler on that line that we drew and cutting across it. Basically we will do this for all of our 8 pieces that we have, and this is giving us 2 half square triangles from each of our squares. So I have made these a little bit bigger than they need to be, and we'll be able to square them up. But before we square them up, we will need to open up our seams and press them open. So I'm going to continue cutting these apart, and when we come back, we'll be pressing open. So as you can see, I've got the iron and I've got all my little half square triangles, and I'm just pressing those seams open, and we're doing that for all 16 of our half square triangles. Next, what we will be doing is we will be squaring them up. Now that we've pressed these, we need to square them up. So you want to get your ruler, and you want a ruler that has a 45-degree angle clearly marked on it. So I'm using the Omnigrid one here, and we're going to place that on our half square triangles and line that up on the seam. We're going to take our rotary cutter once we've lined up that up and we're happy with it, and then we're going to trim off our excess. Now remember, I did make these a little bit bigger so we had room to square up our half square triangles. So I'm going to take a little bit off the side and then off the top, and I'm going to turn it, and then I'll reline up that 45-degree angle. And for the 9-inch block, we want to square up to 1 3/4, and for the 12-inch block, we want to square up to 2 1/8. Okay, so 1 3/4 for the 9-inch block and 2 1/8 for the 12-inch block. You'll continue doing that for all of your 16 half square triangles, and when we come back, we'll be ready to make our corner sections. Okay, so you can see here we've got all of the block laid out, and we're going to start piecing it together. So we're going to take those first 2 half square triangles and we're going to sew them using a 1/4-inch seam allowance, making sure that you're being very accurate with your 1/4-inch seam allowance, especially if you're doing the 9-inch one. We will press the seams open for every seam that we create. We're going to press these open, and you can see here I am just finger pressing that. The next piece that we're going to put on is the little white piece of fabric, the little rectangle, and depending on what size block you're doing, you're going to add that to those half square triangles. And as you can see, I'm using a 1/4-inch seam allowance. We're not going super close on the sewing here, because by now, if you've been doing this series, you know how to do a 1/4-inch seam allowance. Again, we're just going to finger press that open. You can even press it with the iron if you feel more comfortable, and I was finding that it wasn't sitting very well for me, so I gave that a quick press, and now it's sitting a lot nicer. Next, we're going to take the 2 squares, again 1/4-inch seam allowance, and sew them. Press the seam open, and we're just creating that corner crown at the moment. Next, we take the 2 half square triangles and sew them together. Once we've sewn these together, we will then add our little white square that we've got left up in that corner part of the crown. And again, like I've said throughout, we are pressing the seams open. So every seam that you create, you want to press that seam open. Whether you do that by finger pressing or ironing, that's up to you. I am a big finger presser. I also have little rollers and stuff that I use next to the sewing machine. I tend not to use them too much in the videos because I try to limit the amount of notions and everything that we're using for our blocks, for those that don't necessarily have them. Then we're going to take our little 2 squares that we sewed together and add them to the white piece that we sewed to our half square triangles earlier. And then after this, once this is pressed open, we are then going to attach our 2 components together, as you can see here, and I'm using the fork pins and making sure that those seams are lining up. And then again, I'm going to use a 1/4-inch seam allowance and stitch that together. And that is our crown now done. And so basically you might need to use your purple thing to get it to go through your machine. This machine that I'm using here is my spare machine. I'm still waiting on my other machines to be repaired. They need to get parts for them and stuff like that, so it's taking a little bit longer, and he only comes to town once a month. So yes, anyway, I digress. So once you've done that, you're going to press that seam open, and then we are going to square them up. Now when we square up our crowns, we want them to match our little strip that we've got sitting there. You can see that little strip there, and that strip on our 12-inch one is measuring 5 1/4 by 2 7/8. So on your 12-inch block, you want to square up your crowns to 5 1/4. Okay, and on our 9-inch one, we want to square them up to 4 1/8. So you can see here that I don't really need to take a lot off. I'm just going to take a little bit of the excess off, and I'll turn that around. You can see that it was very minuscule that came off, and then I've got those 2 straight edges now, and then I will line them up and then just trim that off, and you can see very minimal amount coming off. So that is one that we've done, and we have to do that for all 4 corners. But I like to then just add my little strip on there to make sure that they are lining up and that I have cut everything to the right size. And I'm just going to use a 1/4 inch seam allowance to stitch that together. Okay, so you can see here that I have got all of my crowns done. I'm just giving them one final press to make sure that all the seams are setting correctly. I have squared everything up, and now we're going to create our rows. So I'm starting with the top one. I've added the centerpiece on. Now I'm going to the center one. I will add that on, and using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Again, we want to really make sure that we have our 1/4 inch seam allowance very accurate, and I'll just chain piece these through again, and then I'm adding that white strip onto the bottom crown, and then again using a 1/4 inch seam allowance and just stitching that through. Once we've done that, we will press the seams open, and then we will add our remaining parts to create each of our rows. Okay, so we've sewn all those together. Now what we need to do is add our rows together. So we only have 2 seams to worry about because we have those strip sets in there, so we don't have to match up all those little seams. Using your fork pins is the best way to go. They are my favorite. The link is down below, as I say in every video. They are a game changer. You're going to line up those center seams, and that's all I'm worrying about right now. And then as I go to the sewing machine, I will make sure that all of my raw edges are lining up. And again, we're going to use a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and we're going to sew right along that long edge, and you can see there that I'm just lining up my raw edges, and there's no seams to worry about on those white fabrics. Again, it's very important that you keep an accurate 1/4 inch seam allowance. I can't stress this enough when we're patchworking, because otherwise you'll start to lose points and all that sort of stuff. So if you haven't invested in a 1/4 inch seam, either seam guide or a 1/4 inch foot for your sewing machine, I highly recommend that you do. I will leave some links down below where you can get some amazing products that will give you many different feet for your machine. They fit most Singer, Brother, Pfaff and Husqvarna. So any of your generic machines as well that you might use, they generally fit as well, and they're from Madam Sew. So I will leave that link down below for you. So we've done that now, and basically I'm just showing you there that we haven't lost any points or anything like that. So we're going to press that seam open. Again, we're going, as I've said, right throughout this block we're going to be doing that. Okay, so once you've pressed that open, we're going to take our last row and we're going to attach it to the block. Now, we're going to do exactly the same thing as what we did with the first row. We are going to use our fork pins. We're going to find those center seams. We're going to put a pin in there, and then we'll head to the sewing machine, making sure that all our raw edges are lining up, and then we'll do a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then basically our block is done. Once you have that row on, give it a good press, and there you go. The Queen's Court is now all finished. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I really do appreciate you being here. I hope that you enjoyed making the Queen's Court quilt block. I love making this block. It's such a cute little block to make, and it looks perfect in a big quilt just using the one block. If you haven't already done so, make sure you hit that subscribe button and the little bell icon beside it to all notifications. And while you're there, give it a thumbs up as well, and maybe share it with some of your friends over on the social medias. If you'd like to join our Facebook or our Patreon, all that information is down below where you can find out what's happening where and all that sort of stuff. But that is it from me today. Have a wonderful day, everybody, and as always, I will see you in the next video. Bye for now.